Thank you all for coming out so much. Thank you to Wormhole for having us. Thanks Mark and Greg for agreeing to table for us. And thanks Gustavo for getting here. And thanks Joe for helping to book everything. Thanks again, Gustavo. Gustavo's the publisher. We met almost 15 years ago, I guess, as undergrads here in Gainesville at writing workshops and stuff in college. And Gustavo is a little bit older, and I admired him so much. I looked up to him. He was a much more fearless and aggressive and, self-composed artist way earlier than I was. So it was always so cool to see what he was up to next. He would, wheat paste and glue his poems around campus, and so they couldn't be ripped off, or they would ruin something if they got ripped off. And he had a whole literary persona and recorded things and did shows, and he was just, he's definitely one of my idols in DIY Gainesville history. So to have my book be so much, intertwined with his work, and to see him grow as like a bookmaker has been super, super special. And so thank you for all the work you put into this, man. Thank you all for coming out. The book is called First National Yoga. It's a book of very, very short poems that I started writing regularly at the end of 2019, just because I was in a super writer's block and couldn't write anything very long. So I was like, just set a limit to yourself and make yourself write something very short regularly, and it will help. And it did, but then it was also the pandemic, so it kind of like was this practice that I was, doing during that time and during the Black Lives Matter part of 2020 and all the various, social events that you remember well because they feel like they still just happened. So the book kind of became this like reflection of that part in time as well. So it's a weird, unintentional, memoir-ish diary of weird short poems. And so I hope you all get a chance to look at it. I don't know if a reading in person is like the best utility for very, very short poetry. Gustavo has called them contemporary haiku, but I feel like I, drift so far away from those rules so often that I just stick to very, very short poetry because it's asking less of the poetry gods to judge my knowledge and skill. But I'm going to read like a long section, or not a long, I'm going to read like, a couple dozen or so of those poems, and then I'm going to read a couple like medium to longer length pieces that grew out of those poems. And I hope that if you take a look at the book and pick it up, then you get, the chance to spend more time with them and just kind of like, mull them around in your head and think about them. And I think that's my favorite way to digest very short stuff, is to just pick it up and put it down. But we only have a short time together, right? So I want to give you more bang. All right. Thank you. All right. You're the smell of fresh yogurt cake I want to fold warm into ice cream. I crash into the king pillow between us like surf into a seawall. I've been in fewer hands than this used CD in this harbor town. It's 3 a.m. Do you really want this man with his finger on the button of the Keurig? You done me wrong, like prose on a Scantron. It's night that falls, but day that breaks, and so you pay for my mistakes. Our love has been blessed by the magic that tore the Dakotas apart. The fleas stormed our yard and got caught in our leg hair. Baby, what mercy has summer ever shown us? Dead frog, tiara of flies, this heat will make crackers of us all. It's hard drying on a mattress that sponged the sweat of 1,000 fevers. Envelop me, autumn, and suck the ants back through my floorboards into the underworld. So those are good for the nice weather that we're ashes to ashes, bit to bit, you can't skip death like a hip-hop album skit. Fresh from the frog, it's an all-new Gilmore Girls. Can Rory face the void? Dredging eggplant makes me think of my mom thinking about her aunt. The old suspense of a nun's ruler bent away from young wrist spared not my mom. Born a pepita and paid in pumpkins, of course I thought wages were fate. I was a born capitalist. My mom went into debt just having me. That's the Mom series. Was there even sex before the 96 Ford Taurus queered our windshields? That's my favorite one. That was the coolest car I ever saw. The night we realized our cat was dying, we made a stir-fry of zucchini, tomatoes, corn, and lima beans. It was a suffering succotash. Dance studio at dusk, masked ballerinas waiting for masked moms. We'll follow once we've been swallowed by the snake that ate our summer. Set free with nothing to believe in but hand plus soap plus hand. Left alone so long that I'm the city's problem, an invasive tree, some shade, no personality. By the time you feel better, I'm a wreck in your wake, trading hangovers like yawns. I've been busy in my other future, long walks still, but nearer to you. Thank you. All right. Here are some of the slightly extended letterboxed versions, director's cuts versions that grew out. Our film's two settings, the shore of my backyard canal, my driveway, you in reverse. Face it, teenage Mike. You cannot force this person to lament alongside you the mainstream pop-punk revival that will recur every 20 years until you both die, old, pretentious, and horny. Much less love you, or hold your hand, or return a pleasant nod. Let go of what you've clenched most desperately, like oak, like squirrel ejecting from a falling oak. I worry you'll learn this too late, how to take a hint. Like so many men to come, fapping and or not fapping under a blanket of internet. I worry that you'll always be blind to ends, a barber snipping air, a grill master flipping smoke, a lawnmower marching out to sea. This is about being alone at Common Grounds, which is the high dive now. And the double down in between, in a very ill-advised naming strategy. To name yourself after a big chain of bars and lots of shit. Fuck. I sold those records to afford a haircut for a job interview. I assume the records have not yet left town yet, but their odds are better than mine. Another batch of kids from upstate New York or Lord knows which Kansas City will soon toss out an album I'll remember forever. And I assume they'll never tour down here. Try tipping bartenders with silver dollars and watch their annoyed faces both before and after they realize they're not quarters. Smoker's patio, pretending I had anyone to text. What's the longest two fish in a fish tank will pretend not to notice each other? Where do I see myself in 5 years? Do people get asked that at job interviews anymore? Why bother asking when we're all treading water with white knuckles in a pool with a bomb in its drain? Are they waiting for me to say that I dream of treading instead in a luxury flood? Sorry, a deluge deluxe. Where do I see myself in 5 years? Maybe in the mirror page that ends every baby book so the babies can look at their own enchanting faces, which I think should appear at the end of adult books as well. The next band sound checks, pretending I had anyone to text. Where would I want to be? All I can tell you is that I want to live long enough to see the president read a speech off their phone.
Yes.
Like an open mic poet that doesn't have a printer. That's just
totally.
This is about my friend Alex from South Florida. Your stone face framed by my foggy rear windshield. The cop asks me, "What's up with you?" The answer is always, "We're tired. Long night, am I right?" And it was never a lie. High school starts so early after all. All we really had in common with young Bob Dylan was youth, but that was apparently worth a couple dozen dollars busking at the shopping center if we went to the rich shopping center. Years later, after videos became available of people being murdered for much less, my parents will essentially argue that I would have had it coming were I murdered that night back then, I guess. Or that they, the parents of a hypothetically murdered boy, would have had no right to be upset or to say anything in my defense had I been murdered then for what happened. It's hard to tell. For some reason, they are acting wronged. What I'm talking about, what happened to me, doesn't sound like much, but of course not much is plenty. The keys were not in the ignition, but we were in the car. The tall boys were not empty, but they were still open. We were underage, but we were white, and so were, you would assume correctly, the cops. My skull was spared the pavement, but my PBR was not. This is a tale from my native land, or at least the small slice of it I have seen, where steakhouses become nightclubs after hours, and where you have to drive literally everywhere, and the beach is just a short drive away, but all the best parking is illegal. We were so inalienably lucky, and still too young for the discos of our future. So every Friday night, after leaving Denny's at 1 a.m., full of free coffee refills, we blinked so hard, so fast that we migrained. This is about being the child in the 90s. Ever heard of it? On Sunday, the ashtray, an heirloom, draws half the aunts to the porch, leaving the others with the dishes. Change the subject, but the bachelor uncle is also an expert in that. I throw a fallen coconut from my front yard over my house into my backyard, and then from my backyard into the canal. The day before, I was stuffed in a Birdine's dressing room, distressed that my pants never seemed to fall effortlessly like a cartoon's. The 90s, man. They were like opening your mouth and just being very pleased that you possessed a tongue. They were like a VHS box for a movie that was such a surefire hit that they never even bothered filming it. It sounds impossible, but I swear most of the 90s actually happened in the 80s or the 2000s. Like how the New York you see in movies is mostly Atlanta or Toronto. I swear because I was there, adjusting my VCR's tracking, being excited for Earth Day, and believing that as long as those barbecues lasted, my aunts and uncles would never die. My first decade was its last, a baton pass I thought I could handle. Three more. All right. Thank you all so much again. Will you sing back when I'm retired, down mountain and ever denimed? It's a future I've long promised. I try to read your face, but it's just a map of unattended neighborhood citrus. You're imagining your bike short pockets stuffed with crime. Do we smell as good to death when he strikes us down as a kumquat chopped? A garbage truck arm paused at its apex, my face at the brink of thought. Just tie me to an office chair and launch me down the bike path like you used to, a fate all of us decent folk deserve. Which is why, maybe, that when I wish us well, it sounds now like I'm speaking of houseplants. With Rugrats and my grandparents gone, when would I hear Yiddish again? So I nickname you Pupik, which the internet says means belly button. But the internet is no booby. I'm always good for good intentions, but my adolescence is, in retrospect, a tally of languages I never learned. My mother tongue, reduced to manja, sunlight to sugar to syrup. I check the stove, I check the dryer, I pray my cat would run from fire. Nuke drills, civil rights, we relitigate too much in this life. We need a rest from trying and failing to rest. It's hard living in this lazy ballad, verse upon verse with misogynist plot. I'm looking to hop on a posse cut while my old anthems rot. So I try. When I look at you, so many problems. Whereas my W-2, so many commas. I try. I'm a delicacy. I'll make God drown me in Armagnac before he barbecues me. I try. Oh, steady life. Plum pits cairned atop a cypress knee. I try, but the forces that act most on me are disaster in proximity. High school crush, adjacent seat, disaster in proximity. Fraternity pledge, Hennessy, disaster in proximity. Lightning storm, copper tree, there's darkness on the face of the deep. Move on without me, faster, faster, if nearness then disaster. A COVID-safe barbecue, Campylobacter, proximity and disaster. Olympic Games, vagrancy, closer than we ought to be. Open pool, lone baby, there's darkness on the face of the deep. A Polish Jew, 1943, disaster and proximity. Every day since 2020, distance and no guarantees. Your breath is drifting up to me, a Lazarus of normalcy. We try, and somehow outside, swallows rise from brush to branch like opposite rain. I'll love you until the red storm of Jupiter is near enough to be named. Thank you.